Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Chandler Anderson. I'm talking to you today about Robert Dalton, the candidate for the 17th Judicial District for Public Defender. I want to share with you a very personal story that happened to me. And while I'm outside of the 17th Judicial District, I am someone that is a perfect example of police work gone wrong. So I would like to issue this disclaimer before I proceed with this story and why a public defender would be very helpful if they were someone who robs police system and competence. I fully support the Murray County Police Department. I fully support the Lewisburg Police Department. I fully support the Columbia Police Department. I believe each of those departments have very good officers and deputies. I believe they have very good SROs, and I believe they have guys who are extremely competent and have truly a heart to serve and protect. However, everyone's human and everyone makes mistakes. And it's those mistakes that can be made by the police when they either let their ego take control, or they let their testosterone, in a male's case, take control, or they have some preconceived notion and decide that someone's guilty before they ever have a chance to even talk to them. That kind of creates situations in which a public defender is necessary. I want to tell you my story. I have been blessed enough to be able to afford an attorney. However, there's a lot of folks who aren't. And that's why I'm talking to you today. On April 20th of this year, which was Easter, my wife and I had an argument. My wife, Molly, who all of you know, most likely is a very kind, sweet young lady. She has extremely bad blood pressure problems. We've had renal arteriograms. We've had echocardiograms. We've had just about every workup there is to have. And we can't determine the source of her elevated blood pressure. She currently is on 3 blood pressure medications. And when we argue, as most married couples do, although I would notably like to point out that, we had not had an argument since October the previous year. When we argue, she yells and screams, and I tend to, just go away into another room, and then I yell and scream back, and then we're done. All married people have arguments. So we had an argument, and at the end of our argument, I noticed that just below her eye, she had a thin layer of purple discoloration below the lower lid and along the upper lid, just at the lid margin. I'll show you guys a picture of that here in just a moment. After we got done arguing, I said, "What's wrong with your eye?" She said, "I don't know." She went and looked in the mirror, and sure enough, her eye was turning purple. Her other eye was starting to turn that color too. We took a picture of it so that we could send it to our family doctor and see what he thought it was. We went to bed. The next morning we woke up, and there it was still about the same, not very bad, but we discussed that she needed to see our doctor again to try to get her blood pressure on down, because the most reasonable thing would be that her blood pressure would be elevated, and that would cause the small blood vessels around the eyelids to pop, much like if somebody's vomiting and they vomit and the blood vessels rupture in their cheeks or around their eyelids. I'm going to take a second and show you the picture of Molly's face from that night. You'll see it here. As you see, there's blue discoloration right around the margins of the eyelid. There's no bruising to the orbit or to the lower cheek. You see the little petechia there from where she was yelling and screaming. Molly would back this up. I'm going to tag her in this post, so if you guys have any questions, you're more than welcome to contact her. So, back to what occurred. The next morning, Molly's mother started blowing up Molly's cell phone, just calling. Molly was already upset about the issue we had argued about the night before, and so she didn't answer. So, Molly's mother, and I'll be completely honest with you, who is quite codependent and has interfered in our relationship for many, many years, decided she was going to have the Murray County Sheriff's Department do a welfare check, which is fine. It's unnecessary, but that's what she does. And we've come to terms with we're just going to have to limit our interaction with her because she's codependent. So the sheriff's department sends out a deputy by the name of Marcus Albright. Mr. Albright, and this is according to my wife's statement, Mr. Albright presents to our door. Molly opens the door and he explains he's Marcus Albright and he's been called out to do a welfare check, and clearly you have been abused, ma'am. His first statement, according to Molly, was that you have clearly been abused. Molly explained to him that this was from her blood pressure and that we are in the process of getting this investigated to find out what happened and why her blood pressure continues to be high. He then says to her, "Ma'am, you don't have to be afraid anymore." That was his statement to her. You don't have to be afraid anymore. She then replies with, "I'm not afraid. I have my phone. I could have called the police had I been afraid of my husband." He proceeds to say that I'm going to be arrested. My wife then says, "Hey, I don't want my husband arrested. He hasn't done anything. We had an argument. He hasn't done anything." Mr. Albright says, "Well, it's out of my hands at this point. It's out of my hands at this point." So, I'm seeing patients at my primary care clinic on the 21st. My nurse comes to tell me that there are some officers there to talk to me, which is not uncommon because, again, I'm friends with the police force. I try to do all I can for the men and women who keep us safe. Well, I tell her I'll be right out. And so I go out and there's 3 officers, or 3 deputies, I should say, there. And they want to talk to me. So we go into a room and Mr. Albright proceeds to tell me that he has been to my wife's house, or actually my house, and he's determined that I have abused my wife. My nurse at the time, Rachel Whitwell, says, "No, this is from Molly's blood pressure. We've already looked at the pictures. Chandler showed them to us at lunch." She's explaining this to him. Mr. Albright never took the time to sit down and talk to me about what happened. He assumed, because I'm a big guy and my wife's a little lady, that I beat her up, that I have assaulted my wife. He assumed this. He went and got a magistrate to issue a warrant for my arrest because he assumed that this is what happened. On the police report, he states that I struck my wife multiple times in the face in witness of my 10-year-old daughter. Folks, our argument was at midnight. Our daughter was asleep. Asleep. Numerous times I checked in on our children because my wife was upset. And I didn't want them to hear their mother upset. Secondly, folks, I want to make a point. This is my hand. Now, I showed you the picture of my wife's face. This is my hand. If I had struck my wife, don't you think there'd be a lot more damage than what's on her face? Now, Mr. Albright never once asked me any question about it. I could have been stabbed. Let's play devil's advocate. I could have been stabbed and sewn myself up at home. Then who's the primary aggressor there? Wouldn't have been me. But nonetheless, without talking to me, he arrests me. He puts me in the back of a police car, and I'm transported to the Murray County Sheriff's Department, where I find out that I have to spend 12 hours to cool down. Supposedly, this incident occurred at 11 p.m. to 12 p.m. the night before. I had worked all day seeing patients, and I had plenty of time, if I was upset, to cool down. I called my attorney, came out to see me at the jail, Robert Dalton. Robert then went on to have some medical issues, so Jason Watley picked up my case. The next 2 days later, my wife goes and signs an affidavit with Robert to say, my husband's never struck me. I'll attach it here. I'll ease over and give you a second to see that. If you'll notice, it says, my husband didn't strike me. This is a result of my blood pressure. there it is, folks. It's a sworn affidavit. So, this is my message to the folks of the 17th Judicial District. I'm an upstanding citizen. I've never had a criminal charge in my life. I have a great relationship with the police department, law enforcement. I take care of those guys. Those guys risk their lives every day to take care of us. There are folks out there that would lay down their life to protect you and I. But because of one arrogant, exaggerating, embellishing, and I firmly believe egotistical officer, my children did without their father for a while. I sat in jail for 12 hours, and I was humiliated. Now, under the current regime in the 17th Judicial District, I would be convicted if I had a public defender. In the absence of any evidence that I had actually done something, I would be convicted, because Donna Orr Hargrove does not try cases. She meets and pleads. She meets people the first day and she berates them into pleading. Folks, think about this. If you watched our other video from Rob, 16 years Donna Orr Hargrove has been the public defender, and she has yet to win one case. One case in 16 years. She has yet to win one solitary case in 16 years. Folks, there are police officers out there who are in it for the wrong reason. Then, for every one of those, there's 100 out there that are in it for the right reason. But I'm sharing with you my story because Marcus Albright tried to ruin my life. Luckily, this all is going to be okay for me and my wife. Now, I want to show you something here before I go. Picture Molly you saw before. I want you to look at the picture of this lady. Her eyes look very much the same. Very much the same. Now I want you to look at this line out of the scholarly article that included this picture. Even emergency room personnel felt that this woman had been abused, when in fact it is a medical issue and a complication from hypertension. If I was Marcus Albright, I would have taken the time to speak with someone who has 8 years of medical education and 2 thriving practices. Folks, I don't want you to leave from here thinking that the police aren't your friend. Most police officers will do anything in the world to help you. But there are a few out there that will rob you of your constitutional rights. And that is why you need someone like Robert Dalton to be your public defender if you're arrested. You need someone that's going to see you not as case number 4,578 for the year, but rather Chandler Anderson, who has 3 children and a wife, 2 businesses, that needs to be defended against an incompetent, aggressive officer. Folks, if this happened to me, it can happen to anybody. So on August 7th, when you enter the election booth, vote for Robert Dalton. Vote for someone who is going to fight for individual rights. Vote for someone who is going to fight for the Constitution to be upheld. Vote for someone who wants to take care of people who are wrongfully arrested. People who are wrongfully accused. And not just cattle mill people through. Folks, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you listening to my story. And I hope on August 7th, when you step into that election booth within the 17th Judicial District, that you vote for Robert Dalton for public defender.